It began in the quiet town of Viralton, a place known more for its mist-covered hills and old stone bridges than for anything resembling power or nobility. In Viralton, people did not speak loudly about wealth or influence. They survived, they endured, and they kept their secrets buried beneath polite smiles and lowered eyes. Elira Winthorne had learned all three habits too well. She stood behind the counter of her late father's trading office, fingers tracing the edge of a worn ledger that no longer balanced, no matter how many times she recalculated. The inked numbers mocked her. The debts were real, growing, and now dangerously overdue. Her father had been a merchant of modest reputation, brilliant with trade routes, reckless with risk. When he died unexpectedly, what remained was not wealth, but obligation. Creditors arrived like winter crows, patient, silent, and certain they would feed. And at the top of that list was a name that never belonged in a place like Viralton, the Duchy of Caelraven. No one in town had ever seen the Duke himself, but everyone knew what his ledger seal looked like. Black wax, stamped with a crest of a raven gripping a crown. It was said that when Caelraven collected a debt, it was never merely money he took, it was terms. Elira exhaled slowly, forcing herself to read the final notice again. Payment required in full within 7 days, or settlement will be collected in alternate form. Alternate form. The phrase had kept her awake for nights. The bell above the office door rang suddenly. Elira startled, quickly closing the ledger. A man stepped inside without hesitation. He wore traveling attire too fine for Viralton mud, cloak lined with dark embroidery that shimmered faintly, like oil under candlelight. His presence made the room feel smaller, as if the walls had quietly leaned inward. He did not introduce himself. He simply placed a sealed envelope on her counter. Black wax, raven crest. Her stomach tightened before she even touched it. "You are Elira Winthorne," the man said, not asking. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "If this is about the debt." "It is," he interrupted smoothly, "and it has escalated beyond your town's jurisdiction." Her fingers hesitated over the seal. "I was given 7 days. You misunderstand," he said. "The Duke does not extend grace periods. He extends notice." That word, notice, felt colder than anything she had heard before. Elira broke the seal. Inside was not a demand for coin, not a warning of seizure, not even a contract. It was a summons. By decree of His Grace, Duke Caelan of Caelraven, the bearer of this notice is to present herself at Ravenspire Estate. The debt of House Winthorne shall be settled through binding arrangement. Her breath caught. Binding arrangement? The man finally looked at her directly, his expression unreadable. "You are to be transferred into the Duke's household." Silence swallowed the room. Elira almost laughed, but it came out wrong, sharp and disbelieving. "Transferred? I am not property." The man tilted his head slightly. "In Caelraven law, unpaid debt becomes obligation. Obligation becomes service. Service becomes ownership, if required." Her hands curled tightly around the paper. "That is barbaric. That is lawful," he corrected gently. "And the Duke does not concern himself with sentiment." A heavy pause followed. Outside, Viralton continued its quiet life. Carriages rolling through mud, vendors shouting about grain prices, children running between stalls. But inside that small office, Elira felt as though the world she knew had already begun to fracture. "There must be another way," she said firmly. "I can work it off. I can sell assets." "There are no assets remaining," the man said simply. "Only you." The words struck harder than they should have. Elira forced herself to steady her voice. "And if I refuse?" The faintest hint of something almost like pity passed through his eyes. "Then Caelraven will enforce compliance," he said, "and you will still go, only without the dignity of choice." The air felt too thin to breathe properly. Elira looked down at the crest on the letter again. The raven seemed almost alive, as if it had been waiting for her attention. "Why me?" she whispered. "I am not important." The messenger paused, as though considering whether to answer. Then he said, "That is not what the Duke believes." Before she could ask anything further, he turned toward the door. One carriage arrives at dusk, he added. If you walk into it willingly, your transition will be smoother. And if I don't? He opened the door slightly, letting cold air seep in. Then it will still arrive. And he left. The bell above the door rang once more, then settled into silence. Illyra stood alone with the letter in her hands, the weight of it feeling heavier than iron. The room that had once felt familiar now seemed foreign, as though she no longer belonged inside it. She thought of her father, of his promises that debts were temporary, that trade always balanced in the end. He had been wrong. Outside, the sky had begun to darken into the color of bruised silver. Evening was approaching too quickly, like a decision already made without her consent. Illyra folded the summons carefully, almost mechanically. Not acceptance, not surrender, just survival. But as she placed it into her coat pocket, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. Not fear alone, something sharper. Curiosity. Because somewhere in the unreachable silence of Kaelraven, a duke she had never met had decided she was worth more than debt repayment. And that, more than anything else, felt dangerous. The carriage would come at dusk, and Illyra Winthorne would have to decide whether she was being taken or whether she was already stepping into something she did not yet understand. If this story pulled you in, tell me what you think Illyra should do next, and don't forget to subscribe to Sandy Love Tales. But what Illyra did not yet know was that the carriage arriving at dusk was not meant to take her to the Duke, but to something far older than the Duke himself. Illyra did not sleep that night. The summons lay on her desk like a living thing, its black wax crest catching every flicker of candlelight as if it were breathing. Outside, Viralton had fallen into an uneasy stillness, the kind that came before something irreversible arrived. She told herself she had time. Time to think, time to find another solution, time to deny what was already set in motion. But deep down, she knew the truth by the way the air itself felt heavier as dusk approached. The carriage arrived without announcement. No wheels on gravel, no horses neighing in warning. It was simply there when she looked up from the window, parked across the street as though it had always belonged there. The vehicle was black, polished, and too refined for a town like Viralton. Its surface reflected the dying light in fractured fragments, like shattered glass refusing to settle. Illyra's breath caught. The driver stood beside it, unmoving, face obscured beneath a hood. He did not knock. He did not call her name. He simply waited. That silence was the summons more than the letter had ever been. She stepped outside anyway. The air outside was colder than it should have been for evening. Every step toward the carriage felt less like walking and more like being drawn forward by something she could not resist. When she reached it, the door opened on its own. She hesitated only once. Then she stepped inside. The interior was nothing like she expected. It was not cramped or simple. It was spacious, lined with dark velvet and faint silver embroidery, resembling ravens in flight. A faint scent of cedar and something older, like rain on ancient stone, lingered in the air. The door closed behind her without sound, and the carriage moved instantly. Velocity without motion. No jolt, no sound of hooves. Only the sensation of leaving something behind that could never be returned to.
At this point in the story, everything Illyra believed about debt, family history, and even her own identity has completely shifted. What began as a simple financial obligation has now revealed itself as something far more structured and dangerous. A system that doesn't just track money, but rewrites human existence through reset conditions and living anchors. Ravenspire is no longer just a setting. It is behaving like a controlled intelligence, reacting to Illyra's awareness as much as her presence. Kaelin, the Duke, is also no longer a simple authority figure. He appears to be bound to the same system he controls, which raises a critical tension. Is he protecting Illyra, or managing her until activation becomes unavoidable? The introduction of the original debt holder suggests that Illyra's arrival was not the beginning of this cycle, but the continuation of something older and unfinished. At this stage, the central question is no longer what Illyra will choose, but whether choice is still possible within a system designed to override it.
The landscape had shifted into unfamiliar terrain. Long roads cutting through shadowed fields, distant silhouettes of towers that did not belong to any map she knew. She turned sharply. The carriage was empty. Not empty in the sense of abandonment, but in the sense of absence where presence should have been. There was no driver inside, no guards, no attendants, just her, and a seat opposite that she was certain had not been there a moment ago. It was occupied now. A man sat there calmly, as though he had always been part of the space. He wore no crown, no visible symbol of authority, yet everything about him carried weight, the kind of quiet dominance that did not need introduction to be understood. His gaze lifted to meet hers, not harsh, not warm, just observant. "You arrived willingly," he said. Elira froze. "Who are you?" A faint pause before he answered. "Kaelan, expected chains," he said. "I expected explanation," she replied sharply. His expression did not change, but something subtle shifted in his attention. Like interest, restrained but present. "Debt always expects chains," he said. "That is why most people remain in it." Elira narrowed her eyes. "Then why bring me here personally?" A faint silence followed, long enough that the movement of the carriage felt louder than their conversation. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Because your debt is not the reason you are here." That statement should have comforted her. It did not. It unsettled something deeper. Elira stepped forward slightly, bracing herself against the motionless motion of the carriage. "Then what is?" Kaelan's gaze drifted briefly toward the window, where the world outside continued to shift into unfamiliar territory. "You were never meant to inherit that debt," he said. His stomach tightened. Redirected by whom? He looked back at her now, and for the first time there was something sharper beneath his calm. A cold silence spread between them. Elira's voice lowered. "So I am being hidden away?" "No," he said simply. "You are being moved." The distinction made no sense. "To where?" she demanded. "Ravenspire," he replied. "And after that?" Kaelan's eyes lingered on her, a moment longer than necessary. "That depends," he said softly. "On what?" The carriage slowed slightly, though no destination could be seen outside now. Only darkness, stretching like endless water before dawn. He answered with deliberate calm. "On whether you remain what you are, or become what was already written for you." Elira felt something tighten in her chest, not fear alone, but resistance. "I am not a prophecy," she said. He almost smiled. "Almost. That is what everyone believes, until they are proven otherwise." The carriage came to a halt, not gently, not violently, just suddenly still. Elira turned toward the window again, and saw nothing. No road, no sky, no horizon. Just a vast iron gate rising from the darkness ahead, impossibly large, engraved with the same raven crest she had seen on the letter. Only now, it was not ink. It was carved. The Duke stood. "We have arrived," he said. Elira did not move. "Where is this place?" His answer was quiet. "Where debts stop being counted and begin being answered." The gate began to open on its own, and beyond it, something unseen stirred in the darkness. Not waiting, but aware. Suspense. Because inside Ravenspire, Elira was not the only one being watched. The gates of Ravenspire opened like something remembering how to breathe. Elira stepped through before she could convince herself otherwise, and the moment she crossed the threshold, the air changed. It was colder here, heavier, charged with a silence that felt intentional, as though the estate itself was listening to her every thought. The courtyard stretched far beyond what the exterior had suggested. Black stone paths wound through gardens of pale, unfamiliar flowers, that seemed to bend slightly toward her as she passed. Lanterns floated without visible flame, casting a dim silver glow that never fully reached the ground waiting beneath them. "Stay close," Kalen said behind her. Elira turned sharply. "I never agreed to be escorted like a prisoner." He walked beside her now, unhurried. "You agreed by entering the carriage. I had no choice." "Everyone believes that," he replied calmly, "until they realize choice often arrives before understanding does." She hated how little emotion he showed. It made arguing feel like shouting into stone. The grand doors of Ravenspire loomed ahead. Taller than any structure she had seen in Viralton, carved with layered ravens whose eyes seemed to follow movement. As the doors opened, warmth spilled out, but not comfort. It was the warmth of presence, of occupancy, of something alive inside. Elira stepped into the hall. The interior was not what she expected. It was not a cold fortress of debt collectors and guards. It was a vast, dim-lit space filled with suspended balconies, rotating staircases, and walls lined with portraits whose subjects did not remain still when she looked away too long. Somewhere deeper in the estate, she heard movement, not footsteps, something more deliberate. "How many people live here?" she asked. "Fewer than it appears," Kalen said. Elira frowned. "That is not an answer. It is the only honest one." A servant appeared without warning, bowing slightly. Their face was partially hidden beneath a dark veil, and they did not speak. They simply placed a folded garment into Elira's hands before disappearing again into the shadows. She stared at it. "I am not changing clothes." Kalen glanced at it. "You are. Why?" A pause. Then, "Because what you are wearing belongs to the life you left behind." That sentence carried more weight than it should have. Elira did not respond, but she followed him anyway. The deeper they walked, the quieter the estate became. Not empty, never empty, just controlled, as though sound itself was being measured and restricted. They stopped before a set of tall doors marked with the same raven crest, but this one was different. It was not carved as symbol, it was carved as warning. Kalen pushed the doors open. Inside was a chamber lined with high shelves and suspended glass cases. Documents floated mid-air in slow rotation, held by invisible forces. At the center stood a circular table, etched with concentric markings that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Elira stepped back instantly. "What is this place?" Kalen moved to the table, placing his hand over one of the markings. The light beneath it responded. "The ledger chamber," he said. Elira's voice tightened. "So this is where debts are kept?" "No," he replied. "This is where they are interpreted." She stared at him. "You speak like debt is a living thing." He looked at her then, fully. "It is." Before she could respond, the glass cases around the room shifted slightly, not moving randomly, turning toward her presence, like they had been waiting. Elira felt it then. That sensation from before. Not curiosity this time, but awareness. Not hers. The room was watching her. "Why am I here, truly?" she asked quietly. Kalen's expression changed for the first time. Not emotion exactly. Something more restrained. A decision not yet spoken. "Because your father's debt was not the original one," he said. Elira froze. "What?" He stepped closer to the table. "Your family was used as a transfer point, a vessel, a replacement." Her breath caught. "That makes no sense." "It does," he said, "when the original debtor could not be reached." Elira shook her head slowly. "You are saying someone gave my father a debt that wasn't his." "I am saying your father was made to carry it," Kalen corrected. "Why?" Her voice was rising now, but the room seemed to absorb it, refusing to echo. "Because it was meant to find its way to you eventually." Silence dropped between them like a blade. Elira took a step back. "No, I never agreed to anything. I never signed anything." Kalen's gaze sharpened slightly. "Consent is irrelevant in what predates it." That sentence made the air feel thinner. "What predates it?" she asked, voice barely steady. He did not answer immediately. When he finally did, it was quieter than before. Something sealed into your bloodline long before Viralton existed as a town. A distant sound echoed through the chamber then, like metal shifting deep within stone. Illyra turned sharply toward it. What was that? Kalen did not move. It has noticed you, he said simply. Illyra stepped back again. What has? But before he could answer, the floating documents in the room stopped rotating. All of them, frozen at once. Then, slowly, one by one, they turned toward her. Illyra felt her pulse spike. This is not normal, she whispered. Kalen's voice lowered. No. A pause. It is awakening. The chamber lights dimmed further, reacting to something unseen. Illyra looked at Kalen, searching for any sign this was a mistake, a manipulation, anything she could anchor herself to. But his expression remained calm. Worse. Stable. You brought me here for this, she said slowly. He did not deny it. What am I? She demanded suddenly, stepping forward. The glass cases around her began to hum faintly, responding to her voice. Kalen finally answered, and this time there was no distance in it. You are not a debtor, he said. You are the condition that completes the debt. The room shuddered. Illyra staggered back as the table's markings flared brighter, reacting violently now. Kalen moved quickly, placing his hand over the center point, stabilizing it. But even then, the energy did not fully subside. He looked at her. And now, he said quietly, it has fully registered your presence. Illyra's voice broke slightly. What does that mean? Kalen met her eyes. It means Ravenspire is no longer protecting you from the debt. A beat. It is protecting the debt from you. The chamber went silent in a way that felt like a final decision had already been made somewhere unseen, and somewhere deep within the estate. Something locked for a very long time, turned once. If this revelation shocked you, tell me what you think Illyra really is. And don't forget to subscribe to Sandy Love Tales for the next part. Because what Illyra had just awakened inside Ravenspire was not the debt, but the reason the Duke was never allowed to leave the estate. The moment Illyra stepped away from the trembling ledger chamber, she realized Ravenspire did not behave like a building. It behaved like an awareness. The corridors subtly shifted as she walked, not changing shape in obvious ways, but in the way distance felt unreliable, as though the estate was deciding how far she was allowed to go. Kalen did not leave her side this time. He said nothing for a long stretch, guiding her through a series of archways that seemed to appear only after she committed to moving forward. You said, I am the condition that completes the debt, Illyra finally said, breaking the silence. Explain it properly. Kalen's voice remained calm. A debt is not just obligation. In Kaelraven law, it is a sealed imbalance. Something must exist to restore it. Illyra frowned. Money restores it. Only surface imbalance, he said. Not structural. She slowed. You are speaking in riddles. He stopped walking, turning slightly toward her. No, you are just used to smaller truths. That answer irritated her more than it should have. The corridor opened into a wide hall filled with suspended mirrors. None of them reflected her correctly. In some, she stood alone. In others, she was surrounded by people who were not there. In one, she was kneeling. In another, she was crowned. Illyra stepped back immediately. What is wrong with those? Kalen watched them without reaction. They are not broken. Then why do they show different things? He looked at her. Because they are not showing now. They are showing possible outcomes. Illyra felt a chill run through her. That is impossible. Only in systems that assume time is fixed, he replied quietly. They continued walking. The air grew heavier the deeper they went, as though Ravenspire was compressing around them, rather than expanding. Illyra noticed something else now. Whispers. Not voices. Not words. Patterns of sound just beneath hearing, reacting to her presence. The estate was not silent. It was listening. Kalen stopped before another set of doors, smaller than the others, older, reinforced with dark iron bands that looked scorched and reforged multiple times. You are not showing me your home, Illyra said. You are showing me containment structures. Kalen did not deny it. That silence alone was confirmation enough. The doors opened inward with a sound like restrained breath. On the other side was a circular archive room. Unlike the ledger chamber, this one was not floating with controlled energy. It was unstable. Shelves tilted at slight angles. Documents flickered in and out of visibility, as if refusing to fully exist. Elira stepped in cautiously. "This place feels wrong." Kalen followed. "It is unfinished." "Unfinished. A debt that cannot settle cleanly creates residue," he said. "This is where residue gathers." Elira looked around slowly. Residue of what? Before he answered, one of the floating documents snapped into focus, directly in front of her. Not gently, forcing itself into visibility. Elira reached instinctively, then hesitated. "What is this?" Kalen's tone changed slightly. "Do not touch that yet." Too late. Her fingers brushed the surface. The moment contact happened, the entire archive reacted. The shelves trembled. The air tightened. And then sound disappeared completely. Elira tried to speak, but no voice came out. Instead, something entered her mind. Not a memory. A transfer. She saw a man standing in a different version of Ravenspire. Not Kalen. Older. Weary. Surrounded by collapsing archives. He was writing something urgently as the walls around him fractured. Then she saw her father. Her father was younger. Alive. Standing before the same man, shaking his head. Refusing something. And then the vision collapsed violently. Elira stumbled backward, gasping as sound returned like a crash into her body. "What was that?" she demanded, breath uneven. Kalen was watching her carefully now. A prior binding event. Her hands were shaking. "That was my father." He nodded once. "Yes. He was here." "Not here," Kalen corrected. "Connected here." Elira's voice sharpened. "Connected how?" Kalen stepped closer to the unstable document, stabilizing it with a faint gesture. The room slowly quieted again, but not fully. "Your father was not the origin of your debt line," he said. "He was the continuation point." Elira shook her head. "Stop saying things like I should already understand them." He turned toward her. "You are not meant to understand it yet." That response snapped something inside her. "Then why bring me here? Why show me any of this?" Kalen hesitated, a fraction longer than before. "Because the system has already marked you as active." Elira froze. Active for what? The archive lights dimmed again, responding to something unseen in the structure. Elira suddenly felt it too. Not just the estate watching her, but something beyond it. Not inside Ravenspire. Inside the framework that Ravenspire was built to hold. Kalen spoke quietly. "There are debts that do not belong to people. You were born inside it." The words did not land like explanation. They landed like confinement. At that exact moment, every unstable document in the room aligned. Not randomly, not chaotically, intentionally, all pointing toward Elira. And then they spoke. Not in language she could hear, in meaning she could not escape. If this revelation changed how you see Elira's story, tell me your theory, and subscribe to Sandy Love Tales for the next part. Because what the documents just confirmed was simple. Elira was not brought to Ravenspire to repay a debt. She was brought to restart one that had already ended once before. Elira stood in the center of Ravenspire's deepest hall, as the truth finally settled into place, like iron locking around bone. The documents no longer floated or whispered. They had aligned. Every single fragment of record, every shifting page, every suspended truth, now pointed directly at her. Kalen did not move. That was what frightened her most. Not the room, not the estate, but the fact that he already knew what was happening. Elira's voice came out low, controlled but trembling at the edges. "Say it plainly. No riddles, no systems, no half-truths. What am I?" Kalen looked at her for a long moment, as though measuring what part of the truth would break her fastest. Then he stepped closer to the central table, placing his palm against its glowing surface. Not the debtor, he said slowly. You are the reset condition. The words hit her harder than any physical blow. Elira shook her head once, sharp. That means nothing to me. It means, he continued, that when certain debts exceed containment thresholds, they are not collected. They are reset, rewritten, rebalanced through a living anchor. Her breath caught. A living anchor. A deeper vibration this time, like something underneath Ravenspire had shifted its weight. Elira looked around sharply. And my father? Kaelin hesitated. That hesitation was enough. He knew, Kaelin said finally. Elira's voice cracked. Knew what? That the debt he carried was not his, Kaelin said, and that refusing it would eventually bring the system to you. Elira felt her knees weaken slightly, but refused to fall. So he accepted it instead of me. Kaelin's expression tightened. He delayed it. There is a difference. You are saying he sacrificed himself, she said, voice rising now. To buy time. Kaelin did not deny it. That silence confirmed everything. Elira turned away sharply, pacing a few steps as the room seemed to contract around her thoughts. This is insane. Debt is money. Trade. Agreements. Not this. This rewriting people into systems. Kaelin's voice remained steady behind her. That is what you were taught, not what is true. She stopped walking, slowly turned back. Elira stared at him. And I am inside one of those cycles. If I am the reset condition, she said slowly, what happens when I activate? Kaelin's silence lasted longer this time, and for the first time, something like caution entered his voice. Then everything tied to your bloodline debt network is erased and rebuilt. Elira's breath stopped. Everything? Kaelin nodded once. Including Ravenspire. The words echoed in the chamber like a final bell. Elira turned sharply. And you? Kaelin did not answer immediately. Then, quietly, including me. The floating documents shattered into fragments of light before reassembling incorrectly, like reality losing patience. Elira stumbled back. What is happening? Kaelin moved instantly, placing both hands on the central table. It has detected activation awareness. Elira's voice rose. I didn't activate anything. You understood it, he said. That is enough. If the reset triggers without control, you will not survive it consciously. Elira froze despite the noise. What does that mean? Kaelin looked at her directly now. Fully. No restraint left. It means you will not remain yourself afterward. The words hit harder than anything before. Elira backed away slowly. So this is not about debt. It is about erasing me. Kaelin stepped forward slightly. It is about preventing collapse. At my expense, she said. At the system's expense if you refuse. He corrected. The chamber suddenly went silent. The noise stopped. The vibration stopped. Even the light steadied. Elira looked around carefully. The far end of the chamber began to open. Not the doors. They were already open. A section of wall simply ceased to exist. And from beyond it came movement. Not footsteps. A presence. Elira whispered, "What is that?" Kaelin did not look away from the opening. "The original debt holder," he said quietly. "The one who started your line." Elira's entire body went cold, calm and certain, as though it had been listening long before she arrived. "Finally," it said, "if you want to uncover who the original debt holder is, tell me your thoughts and subscribe to Sandy Love Tales for the final reveal." Because the voice from the darkness did not come for Kaelin, it came specifically for Elira.
As we reach the end of this part of the journey, Elira is standing at the edge of a truth that can no longer be reversed. The emergence of the original debt holder signals that the story is about to shift from revelation into confrontation, where hidden forces finally step into direct conflict over what Elira truly is, and what the reset will mean for everyone tied to her existence. Nothing in Ravenspire is neutral anymore. Not the estate, not Kaelin, and not even Alira's own identity. Everything is converging toward a single, irreversible point of activation. If you've been following Alira's journey this far, share your thoughts on what you think she should do next and where you are watching from. Your location helps us connect the Sandy Love Tales community more closely across the world. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the final reveal, where the identity of the original debt holder and Alira's true purpose will finally be exposed.